Welcome to another exciting episode of the Entreprenudist Podcast, the place to hear real entrepreneurs and business owners bear it all. I'm your host, Randolph Love III, and we're going to keep doing what we always do, is bring you some of the best entrepreneurs in the nation, in the world, and have them break down how they did it and what they wish they would have did and how they did it and what they wish they would have kept the same and what they still doing the same. But until we bring on this next entrepreneur, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Shearwolf Strongholds, a wealth growth and protection company when it comes to estate planning, when it comes to employee benefits, when it comes to life insurance, when it comes to retirement planning. If your plan ain't Shearwolf, your plan ain't strong. Brenton Harrison has spent over a decade empowering people to take control of their money. He teaches strategies for overcoming the burden of debt, juggling family and money, and establishing a financial foothold for those who were never taught the principles of financial literacy. He has been featured in publications such as Business Insider, USA Today, CNBC, and Forbes. Brenton is a certified financial planner, a chartered life underwriter, and a certified student loan advisor, and is a frequent speaker and workshop facilitator for corporate and nonprofit conferences across the country. Brenton, thank you so much for coming on the Entreprenudist Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's all good, man. The pleasure is all mine. How long have you been doing what you're doing now?
This is actually year 17 for me, believe it or not.
Year 17.
Absolutely.
Is there nothing that you know now that you wish you knew when you first started?
To me, there's a person in my life who says, start how you want to finish. And the idea behind it is, if you can try as hard as you can to think about the structure of the business you want to have or the life you want to have, there's steps you can take from the very beginning to build your way to it. And that's not something that I did. When I started, I just wanted to get started. I wanted to make money fast. I wanted to meet people fast. And I didn't think about how I wanted to structure my day-to-day life. So when I started to pay more attention to those things, I had to undo a lot of habits. I had to restructure a lot of business processes, had to have a lot of tough conversations because I had built towards the wrong direction. And to kind of course correct, it took a lot of effort and a lot of heartache. So I wish that I would start how I planned to finish.
Yeah, they say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. You ever heard that before?
I have.
The second best time is right now, because one thing that once you get into these industries and working with business owners such as myself, and I know you work with business owners and entrepreneurs as well. One thing that you discover is the best time to plan your exit is before you even started. But, 9 out of 10 people, of course, don't do that. Right. But then once they realize, all right, plan how you want to end by how you begin, then you do it. Now, that does require some unraveling. Was there any growing pains that you experienced by, all right, I started this way, but now I got to switch it up? Because, I see you got these designations. Did they come after this realization moment or before?
I had the designations, many of them early in my career. I got my certified financial planner designation later in my career. And it was a part of that same process of realizing that I had built kind of a business that did not match up with my interests. I came into the industry in the life insurance sales industry, and that is very sales oriented. That's very kind of ring the bell mentality. Who can outsell the next person? And if you outsell that person, you get to go on a trip to this place or that place. And I've never been motivated by other people's finances. So to me, if you tell me there's somebody in Dallas who is, selling 20% more than me, if I don't know that person, even if I did know that person, it would have no effect on me. I'm more motivated by doing a little better than I was doing the day before. And to me, when you're in the sales type of environment, and you're trying to get as many people as possible, you may not end up with the depth of relationship that I enjoy. So I had built a book of business where I had a ton of people that I had done these very transactional type of products and relationships with, but I didn't have as many people where it's like, no, this is a person where I sit down and we have deep conversations. And that was what I really wanted. So it took about 3 years to restructure myself from a person who had a lot of people who considered themselves a client because of the promises that I had made. But in reality, they were a customer. And I was looking for someone to have deep client relationships with. And I had to go back and tell people, this is not your fault. This is based on the way that I structured myself. But I'm moving in a direction where we have fewer clients, deeper, more quality relationships. And as a result of that, you can either come and do it this new way that we're doing it, or I'm going to do my best to find a different partner to bring into the equation to make sure that you're handed off well.
Sounds like extreme self-awareness and accountability.
Trying to be.
And then that self-awareness and accountability, it means, in my opinion, it almost means nothing without the transparency, especially if you are, back tracing and saying, hey, I know we did things this transactional way. And of course, one of the benefits of doing things transactionally is typically it might cost less price wise, but it doesn't, the net return doesn't add up, because if you have a stronger relationship with your clients to where you're having a deeper conversation, it sounds like even though they might end up paying more for your services overall, but it ended up, the net positive for them comes out better because you know more about them. You can advise them more. It's not just a transactional sale.
Not only that, in some cases, even before we got started with the new way, the way that I approached the conversation deepened our relationship itself. There was a process that I went through where I realized that I was charging for our fee-based, long-term relationships about a third of what market rate was. Now, it wasn't harming me on the revenue side because I was working with enough people to make up the difference. But I was so spread thin with those people that I wasn't honoring the promise I made to them about the value they would receive. So then I had to go back to people and say, the way I explained it was, you're buying a bag of chips and you can get this bag of chips at this grocery store, or you can get it at the one across the street. I have been selling the same bag of chips for a third of the price as the grocery store across the street. Now, when you find that out, that's not the customer's fault. That's the grocery store owner's fault. And I'm the grocery store owner. So I have no ill will towards the person who paid less. Matter of fact, it's my fault because it's the price that I set. But I think we can both agree that when we find out that I've been charging a third of the price, that the price has to change. And that was the way I explained it to people. And what I did was I didn't change it immediately. I did it in a stair-step process over 2 to 3 years. But I told them this is what we're going to. And I was radically transparent about why I set the first price, why we were moving to the new price. And there were a lot of people who respected the way that I went about it. Now, everybody doesn't like and agree with paying 2 and 3 times what they were paying. But if I'm transparent, you can't knock me for over explaining and trying to do my best to walk through why that change has to be made.
Oh, yeah. Definitely, especially, and you speak in one of those old Pentecostal preacher voices too. So I bet that made it easier for them to take that medicine.
Well, right now I'm slightly under the weather, but I do have a pastor's cadence to me on a regular day. My dad is a physician, but I came from a group of men around me, and the overwhelming majority of them were Seventh-day Adventist ministers. So that is my temperament.
Oh yeah, I can pick up your cadence, man. You can always tell, like the type of people that people grew up around by the way they speak. No matter where they go, even the people who were raised by their grandparents. So, for example, one of the ways that I can tell that somebody was around their grandparents a lot is by how they sit down. They'll be 20 years old and they'll still sit down like something hurt. Like, oh, nothing don't hurt you. You just started saying that because you were around your grandparents all the time, and you saw how they sat down and they made a noise because they heard it, but you making a noise because it's a part of you. And a lot of those things, as it relates to how people deal with money, I know it's based off how they were raised. And speaking of extreme accountability and transparency, I imagine it takes extreme accountability and transparency in order to build wealth while navigating massive debt. How do you help people do that?
Part of it is making sure that there's no shame in the room. So when you are someone who earns good money and you have a lot of debt and you've had nobody to tell you how to manage the money that you've earned, there's been nobody in front of you that you can use as an example. A lot of times those people are not where they want to be. And I'm the first relationship they've had with a formal advisor. So they come into the room and there's a lot of hesitance because there's a lot of guilt and shame that they're not, $100,000 ahead of where they are, or that they have so much consumer debt. So the first thing I just do is put them at ease. Look, man, you're where you are. First of all, most of the people that you think are doing well, they're not doing as well as you thought. But even if they were, it doesn't change where you are. So let's just deal with where you are and make the next best decision. So that's the first thing we do. The next thing that we do is we burst a lot of the myths about where someone like them should start. So if we have someone who comes to us and they are a young attorney and they've got $200,000 of student loan debt, well, there's 10 different ways to pay that student loan debt that would allow them to establish a savings and investment account while they're paying down the debt. Well, a lot of people would have told them, hey, just put a couple $1,000s in the savings account and then pay down all your debt first. That doesn't work with that type of person, right? If you have a type of person who comes in and says that they should be maxing out their 401k, but that article that they read saying that doesn't account for the fact that they have $30,000, $40,000 worth of credit card debt, well, they can't start that way. So we identify the ways that they're going to have to build wealth that differ from what they see online. And then it's just all about exposure and continuing to add to that financial literacy. So if you look at a lot of the strategies that my clients use, many of the times they are the exact opposite of what you would tell somebody to do online, but it's because they don't line up with the avatar of the person that they're writing these articles about. So a lot of our process is just exposure, financial literacy, deepening comfort, and making sure that we're building those bonds over a long term.
Okay, so it sounds like the very first thing you do is let them know that they're just like most other people, and that comforts them.
Yeah. So there are times when somebody will be dealing with something that I've dealt with or am dealing with. So, a perfect example, we had a period of time where my wife was looking for a job. And as a result, we were in a negative cash flow situation. So we had to put some money on credit cards and open up a 0% credit card. And once she got a job, we started to pay down that card over time. It had coincided with us coming out of COVID and buying a house at a low interest rate that was bigger than what we could afford at the time. But the goal was to kind of grow into the house. Then we get in the house and she loses her job. So even me being able to tell a person, I have been in credit card debt, or, hey, I am in credit card debt, and here's the strategy that I'm using to pay it down, or have used it to pay it down, that means the world to somebody who comes into a situation already uncomfortable and feels like they're behind, right? If the person who is in front of them, who is credentialed, who is educated, who does this every day, can say, no, I've dealt with this as well. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Here's how I'm getting through it on my side. That can open up a lot of conversations.
Oh, yeah. And I know there are a lot of practitioners that listen to this podcast. We're somewhat in the same boat. I know we share at least one designation. I'm a chartered life underwriter as well. What a lot of people don't know, the chartered life underwriter, that's the oldest financial designation in the United States, right? And a lot of people don't necessarily equate life insurance with financial literacy. But being that you started on the life insurance side and you still promote and tout your CLU designation, it seems like that's something that you still value. When you are, what designations do you have, and is that important for a potential prospect, whether they're considered a customer or a client, to look into and consider valuable?
Yeah, each designation that I have, I came to the decision to get it, after a long thought process of how does it help my clients. So the Charter Life Underwriter, as you know, it's an insurance-based and business strategy-based designation, which that's a part of it that people leave out of it too. There's a lot of strategy that comes involved with the CLU designation. And to me, that helps because, again, the overwhelming majority of people who come into my shop, they don't have any insurance. They don't have any life insurance. They don't have any disability insurance. They may be financially responsible for a parent that doesn't have long-term care insurance. And the Charter Life Underwriter designation, in my opinion, is the one that goes to the deepest depths of insurance strategy. So that's very helpful for my clientele because it just provides that level of expertise where I'm not just saying you need life insurance. I have some experience in saying how much, here's how it should be structured. Here are some companies that I feel have a stronger product than others. That's why it's helpful. The Certified Financial Planner designation is one where it's giving me a methodology for how I plan. We're looking at everything. I may not be the expert in everything, but I have a working knowledge of how everything impacts a plan. So I have the ability to look at your homeowner's insurance declarations page and see a shortfall there. And maybe I don't offer homeowner's insurance, but I can see the shortfall and I can refer you somewhere. In the same way, I can look at your tax return, and I may not be a tax professional, but I can look and see, hey, you have restricted stock and they're not accurately reflecting the cost basis of that stock on your tax return, and you're going to get double taxed. You need to tell your CPA about that. Those are the types of lessons that you earn in the CFP, broad-based knowledge of almost every area of financial planning. And then the Certified Student Loan Professional, that's because the origin of my client base came when I was introduced to the Student Services Coordinator at Meharry Medical College, which is actually where my father went to medical school. And for a number of years, I did the financial literacy education for their graduating medical and dental students. And when you're dealing with...
Hold on. Before you even go, I got to imagine that group of students has been paying dividends for giving that talk. I would imagine. Do you have a spreadsheet just for the commissions that you get from giving those talks?
I'll say it's been helpful. It's definitely been helpful.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So, but the thing is, Meharry is a private, historically Black medical school, and if you borrow for the entire 4 years, you are going to owe over $400,000 by the time you leave. So when I'm learning what makes these people sweat at night, what keeps them up, what they're worried about financially, I'm looking at 26 to 30-year-olds who are going into the world never having worked, but starting $400,000 behind because of student loans, which is why I got that designation to have a specialty in teaching them how to optimize that repayment over the course of time.
Oh yeah, that's very powerful, and I know I literally just heard within the last week that it's a possibility of student loans being included if someone had to go for bankruptcy. But as far as I've known, for years, decades, student loans were one of the few things that even bankruptcy won't help you get rid of. How do you help people? Because it's one thing to navigate massive debt and knowing that you potentially have an escape valve, but being that student loans fall into a particular category to where you got to deal with it. How do you help people grow wealth while paying off student loans?
So I tell people that learning how to repay student loans is like learning another language. Matter of fact, it's actually like learning the English language, because if you talk to people who are multilingual, they'll tell you that English is a hard language to learn because many of the rules, they don't make sense or they don't apply all the time, right? So there, and there. Like you talk to somebody that speaks another language, you're like, what in the world is going on with there, and there? Like that type of stuff. Student loans are the same way. There's language and there's terminology that doesn't make sense in any other context except student loans. For example, if anywhere else in your financial life, I told you that you were going to consolidate debts, you would think I have to have more than one debt in order to consolidate, right? You have to have multiple things to consolidate. With federal student loans, you can have one loan and consolidate that loan. That's just one example of something that only makes sense in the context of federal student loans. In other areas of your life, if you owe $200,000 and you sign up for a 20-year payment plan, at the end of that 20 years, you're going to have repaid all of that student loan debt. With federal student loans, you can sign up for payment plans where instead of basing the payment on what you owe, they base it on what you make. And there's all these rules that determine what number your student loan servicer uses to constitute what you actually make. So we teach them the differences of those plans. We teach them how to lower what it looks like they made on paper so that their student loan payment is lower. And we teach them how to get their student loans forgiven when it's appropriate. And there are many different ways to have your student loans forgiven. And conceptually, if you're going to have your student loans forgiven, you probably want to do it after having made the least amount of payments as possible. So we help them in those scenarios figure out, how do I make the least amount of payments possible? And if somebody has to repay it in full, then we figure out how do we do it at the lowest interest rate and most favorable repayment terms possible.
Oh yeah, man. That's one of those counterintuitive things in life. The older I get, the different opportunities that I become around, the different people that I meet, the more successful that I get, along with the more successful people that I hang around with, the more you realize the counterintuitiveness of life. One of those counterintuitive things is the more money you make, the least you want it to appear on paper. Whereas the least money you make, the more people want it to appear on paper. Like it's crazy how it works to where the more money you make, the more you want it to seem like you make. And the less money you make, the more you want it to seem like you make. It's one of those things to where it seems like it should be the opposite. Would you say a lot of the things that you deal with helping people get out of debt? Because it's one thing to tell them the statistics. It's one thing to speak logic. But just like we said at the top of the call, a lot of people's beliefs, limiting beliefs, most likely, are based off of what they've experienced in their childhood. I know that's something that I see on your profile that you mentioned it. What have you discovered has been a triggering point for a lot of people, or if you've discovered a triggering point for a lot of people that stems from their childhood with how they treat money in adulthood?
So there's studies out there that say that the overwhelming majority of how you feel about and how you deal with money is formed before you're 13. So even if you don't think that there are things that you saw that impacted your money journey, not only did it impact it, in many cases, it like formed it fully and you can't even change it, right? So if you take an example of somebody who grew up and, you know, maybe they weren't even poor. Maybe, for example, one of their parents was really conservative with money and another one of their parents liked to spend. And maybe they took that child to the mall and they would treat them to some things at the mall. And they would say, don't tell your mom or don't tell your dad. That has a major impact as to how that person deals with money with their future spouse, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up in a household where my dad hid financial purchases from my mom, or my mom hid things from my dad. And now I'm trying to establish a relationship with another person with open communication. And what I saw was that there are some things that you can hold back from these conversations. That may be a small thing. Let's also look at somebody who grew up in an environment, which is the way that many of us grew up in the church environment, where they may feel like having money makes you less moral, right? Imagine that person trying to deal with earning more money than anybody around them has ever made. And they grew up to feel that you were somehow less godly if you were earning more money. Those are things that impact how that person saves, right? So you look at a person who may make $400,000, but they don't have a pot to piss in if you took their job away from them, and you start to figure out why, and you're like, oh my goodness, this guy is giving away all of his money. And it may not be because he really wants to support charity XYZ. There may be some guilt as to having all that money in the first place. So it manifests all over the place. You have other people who have been in rooms where maybe they had a learning disability and they didn't like raising their hand in class, right? That same person may be very likely to sit with the CPA, and the CPA may be telling them something about, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. Otherwise, you're going to owe a $30,000 tax bill. And that person may be afraid to ask why, or I don't understand what you're talking about, or what is this thing that you're telling me to do? So they just don't do it at all. Now they have a $30,000 tax bill. So all of those early childhood things can pop up. And if you don't have some awareness of them, it's not that you can like change who you are, but you can plan around your inclinations. And we do a lot of that at our firm.
Yeah, I know, because, coming from multiple levels of the customer services industries, different things. I went from being an installer to a general lines agent to a insurance adjuster, insurance appraiser, to having, external and internal customers, expert witness work. A lot of things that I've done where I had to deal with a lot of people. Sometimes it can feel tempting to hear an educate like a hesitation in someone, because we know what that feels like. Like when you're good at working with people, if somebody, even if they don't say it, if they have another question, it's like if they don't, it's like they're like, well, okay, all right. It's very tempting, especially when you're trying to get off the phone, especially when you're trying to get to that next customer that to trigger that next commission. It's very tempting to let that slide. How do you ask that question or pull that out from that person that was, as a child, scared to raise their hand?
Man, a lot of it for me is I've been on the wrong side of somebody who didn't ask that question. So I talked about people who I grew up around. A person who's very close to me, died 5 or 6 years ago from a recurring illness. And a big part of how that disease progressed was because they did not get screened as regularly as they should have. And it was because they just didn't understand the directions that their doctor gave them in one of the follow-up visits. And they have always been afraid of physicians. I mean, that's literally, it boiled down to that. Like, if you had gone and gotten this checked 3 months ago, like you should have, we may still be here having this conversation. And instead, that person has passed. So I hate being in rooms where I can see that somebody doesn't get what I'm saying. So I do a lot of public speaking engagements and I scan the room, and I am not paying attention to the person in the room who thinks that they knew everything that I was going to say before I start talking. That's one of the things about giving presentations when you're a financial advisor. There's always another financial advisor in the room, or there's always another tax professional in the room, or there's always somebody who used to be a financial advisor in the room. So they're barely listening to what you say. And the first thing that they're trying to do is just combat what you say. I'm not paying attention to that person. I'm paying attention to the person where, as I'm speaking and trying to explain how something works financially, they have a look of confusion on their face. And I'm going to keep giving different examples until I see that look disappear. And then we move forward, because I want to make sure, no, we don't move forward until you get it. I already get it. I put the presentation together. So it's like, we're not going to move forward until you get it.
Oh, yeah. And that is a very, very delicate balance when you're doing the one-to-many presentation, right? Because not only do you want to make sure everybody gets it, like you said, you usually have that person in the crowd. I tell people, I say it's always going to be. I call them jokingly, I call them a hater, right? I say, hey, it's always going to be at least one hater, right? Now, I've had the pleasure of converting haters in front of that crowd, and that does feel good. But at the same time, just like dealing with you're a little bit better than me. You ignore the haters. Seem like I like to chastise them in front of everybody, right? But let's say I ignore the hater. Sometimes you get that feeling of, all right, I'm trying to educate this person and get that confused look off their face. But at the same time, I got this venue. I know my presentation is 1 hour. I know I want to get as much information in as possible, but I also don't want to answer so many questions that nobody sets an appointment with me, right? How do you deal with that? Is it one of those things where if you were to if nobody left with a confused look on their face and you didn't get one appointment, will you be like, all right, I did my thing? Or will you be like, all right, let me switch this up a little bit?
Well, first I'll tell you how I deal with the hater. And this has never not worked. To me, when I have somebody who I tell them something to think about financially and the person raises their hand and tries to correct me or tries to say, in their experience or my experience, I've done it this way. I always just say, that's the beautiful thing about finances. There's a million ways to get where you're trying to go. So I'm giving you a method that's worked for me. But the thing that I love is that there's other methods out there that can work for people who view things differently. So if you like my strategy, that's something to consider. If you're listening and you like this person's strategy, that's something to consider as well. So now I have affirmed that person. So how on earth could they keep hating on me? It's like I just made you look good in front of this entire audience, unless what you're saying doesn't make sense to anybody in the audience. And then they self-selected you out the way. So there's never not worked. I give people their support and their congratulations. Hey, I'm glad for your experience. This is my experience. I keep it pushing. Now, to the person who doesn't get what I'm trying to say, there is going to be a point where if they're just incapable of getting it, unless we have a one-on-one conversation, I'll say, hey, we got to move forward, but let's have a quick conversation after. But if I don't convert someone to having a meeting with me, I don't typically see that as a failure. As a matter of fact, a lot of the rooms that I'm in, I'm talking to an audience that's not necessarily my ideal client. Because I do so many presentations about basic financial literacy, it is not uncommon for me to be in a room where the people from an earning capacity are not necessarily someone that I would work with. Great income, but not necessarily someone who fits our target client. But to me, I still bring the same energy to the room. I still want to make sure I do a great job. And if nobody sets an appointment, I focus more on what was the general response of the audience. Do they want me to come back? Have they referred me to someone else to go speak there? Because to me, if I'm going to a church or if I'm going to a community center or if I'm going to, like an employee retreat and I'm talking to people in the department where they just don't earn what our clients earn, to me, I'm still going to bring it as hard as I can, because that's what leads to other opportunities. And to me, I just have never been in a position where me doing really, really well in front of an audience has not led to something.
Oh, yeah. I definitely have stories of dealing with people who, because the way that I work when I'm working with people, I have a calendar, right? And the way I see it is, if you click on my available calendar link and there's availability, I don't care how much money you have. Go ahead, set the meeting. I don't care if we've ever done business before in the past. Go ahead and set the meeting. And I've had people every week on my calendar, and we talking about the same stuff. And and if I had to bet any money, I would say they don't have any money, right? But I do ask the questions, and they do tell me, right? I'm more of a farmer instead of a hunter when it comes to selling. But those same people, now I'm not going to say 10 out of 10, but overwhelmingly, I would say 8 out of 10 of those people, you'd be surprised where they are 2 years from now. You'd be surprised the people that they introduce you to. You'd be surprised when they start making quote unquote good money, and they remember how you spent time with them when they didn't have it. And so that said, what is your definition of good money, and how can good money be dangerous?
Well, I mean, good money to the individual is anything where you can put yourself in a position where you have some surplus. So, I'm earning enough to have a little left over at the end of the month, and now I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. The danger comes where the more money you make, you start to run into different conversations that you didn't have to have at lower incomes. So, for example, you talked about showing less income on paper. One example would be, you might tell someone who makes less than $250,000 as a couple to put their money in CDs, for example, right? Well, if you tell that same thing to somebody who earns over $250,000 and doesn't need that income from the CD, then they have to pay income on the interest just like they earned it, but they also have to pay an additional 3.8% in net investment income tax. So they're getting taxed because they make so much that they're dealing with a completely different penalty than someone who earns less. Another example would be someone who earns, let's say they earn $15,000 a month and they're trying to get disability insurance and they sign up for a policy at their job. Well, their policy at their job may say, we're going to replace 60% of your income in the event you're disabled up to a max of, say, $5,000 a month. So that means that if I earn $15,000 a month, I'm not getting my full 60% replaced if I'm disabled. They're stopping me at 5. I earn so much that my limit goes above what my group policy will pay. So if you don't know this and you're disabled, you're sitting there thinking you're going to get 60% of $15,000 a month. And in reality, you're getting $5,000 a month. Now, if you made $6,000 a month, that'd be great. But if you make $15,000 a month and got to go to 5, that's a harder thing to do. So there's all types of examples, whether it's taxes, whether it's estate planning, whether it's insurance, where the more you make, there are these pitfalls that if you're not aware of them, you'll be unprotected or you'll be overtaxed or you'll just miss out on opportunities because no one made you aware.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know it's a lot of people who are the first ones to make over 6 figures in their family, 6+ figures, 6-7 figures. And just like you said, what ends up happening is, and a lot of this keeps getting connected back to childhood, right? Who were the people that you went to that even in retrospect, you were like, okay, even though I didn't listen then, that was good advice, right? And then as you get older, even whether you were an obedient child or a non-obedient child, typically the obedient child ends up becoming more and more obedient toward that authority figure. And even that non-obedient child typically ends up looking back in retrospect and saying, you know what, I should have listened, right? But as you get older and your income increases, that person that you have that experience with that always gave you the best advice, now all of a sudden, when it comes to finances, their best advice a lot of times is the worst advice because they've never made as much as you've made. And because like you said, they're going to say, oh, yeah, put that money in that CD, not realizing that they got that extra tax coming on, not realizing that they have these extra pitfalls that arises. And that being said, I imagine it can feel like the more money you make, that the more you get discriminated against in a negative way. What is reverse discrimination and how does it affect high income earners?
Reverse discrimination is everything we've just been talking about. It is the idea that the more money you make, there are more things that you can't fully participate in because of that income. or there are more taxes that you might owe because of that income. Another example, which is probably the most consistent or prevalent form of reverse discrimination, would be something like an employer match on a 401k. So you might have a company that says, if you put money in your 401k, we'll match the first 3% of your pay that you set aside up to a maximum of $10,000. Well, everybody who works at that company where 3% of their pay is less than $10,000, they get the full 3% match. But if you have someone who earns so much that 3% of their pay is more than $10,000, they don't get the full employee match. That's reverse discrimination. Now, the person who makes less would look at that and be like, big whoop, right? Like, I'll take those problems. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at studies that study the average 401k millionaire, so people with at least 7 figures in their 401k, on average, over $250,000 of that money came from matching contributions. So imagine having $1 million and 250,000 of it came from your company. The 401k match is a huge deal. So if you have someone who's not able to participate at the same ratio, that's reverse discrimination. And you'll find it in almost every area of a person's finances. With taxes, there's something called the alternative minimum tax, where you take a high income earner, and essentially there's 2 tax codes. There's the regular tax code. There's the alternative minimum tax code. And they'll look and they'll say, if you don't pay at least what you owe on the alternative minimum tax code, that's what you have to pay. We don't care what was calculated on the regular way. You got to pay at least this much. So there's all types of examples in each area of people's money where as you earn more, there's more you have to be aware of. There's more at risk. There's more that you can misplan. And that's the benefit of working with wise counsel.
Absolutely. Definitely, there's plenty of benefit of working with wise counsel. And like you said, when dealing with that hater in the audience, there's also more than one way to skin a cat, right? And just to add a little tidbit, a little fun fact to the podcast. A lot of times when it crosses my mind and I come across one of those old sayings, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Sometimes I say, hold on, I wonder where did that come from, right? Where did that first come from? Do you know where that phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat, come from, Brenton?
I'm actually afraid to guess. So I don't know where it came from.
So back in the early 1900s, I think 1800s as well, maybe, but it was a very common in women's fashion for them to wear cat fur. That was very common, right? And it was considered, you were considered like you were doing something. You had some nice cat fur accessory on. And the way that they would get the fur off of the cats was they would pour live cats into boiling water. And that's how they would get the skin off the cat. Until finally somebody said, hold up, there's gotta be more than one way to skin a cat. So,
well, I'm glad that story had a more humane ending than I was expecting.
Exactly. Just imagine walking in and figuring out, like, hold up. First off, why do they have to be alive? Like, why? So, but all truths are parallel. There's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to dealing with your finances, when it comes to dealing with getting out of debt, when it comes to dealing with these perceived notions and inconsistencies and counterintuitive things when it comes to how you deal with life. And that's why it's good to have somebody like Brenton with everything that you talked about on your side. Is there a question that I did not ask you that I should have?
No, that's the good thing with working with people who are aligned. You said so many things where I'm like, man, you spot on it when you were talking about people where even if they're listening to their parent, you look up and you're saying, hey, it's great that you're an obedient child, but you make 10 times what your parents made. The way that you do this is going to look different. Even though you may think that those people hung the moon, like, you got to do it a different way. So, you know, we've talked about the things that are important to my heart when it comes to money and family, and those things, they cross borders and boundaries.
Absolutely. One last question. What is your definition of success?
My definition of success for my life is being able to make an impact at work and being fully present at home. So I have been very intentional about not trying to chase the highest dollar, but to chase the most consistent dollar that allows me to take off work when I need to take off work, to make that event at my son's school when I need to be there, to go on the family vacation and spend those precious moments. So to me, that's what success looks like: to have done well, to have done right by people, to have people speak well of me, and not get home and have my family speak less well of me, right? Because again, growing up in the church, I grew up around a lot of PKs, pastors' kids, where if you ask people in the audience or people in the church what they think of that pastor, they think that pastor is the best person on earth. You ask their children or their wife what they think of them, it's a different answer. And I've never wanted that for myself.
You want the inside to look like the outside, and vice versa. Yeah, right. Definitely. And it seems like, based off of the conversation we've had in this relatively short time, if you're not already, it seems like you're very, very close to being to your definition of successful. Please, one more time, tell people exactly who you are, what do you do, and how they can get in touch.
My name is Brenton Harrison. I'm the founder of New Money, New Problems and the host of the New Money, New Problems podcast. If you want to find more information about our firm, the podcast, the things that we offer, you can go to newmoneynewproblems.com/subscribe.
Exactly. Once again, this has been the Entreprenudist Podcast, the place to hear real entrepreneurs and business owners bear it all. I am your host, Randolph Love III. And until next time, don't play with it. Stay with it until you make pay with it. This is the Entreprenudist Podcast, signing off.